David never thought he was special. He fixed computers for a living and liked it that way. Every night, he worked alone at the big radio telescope in Puerto Rico, listening to sounds from space while everyone else went home to their families. The job was perfect for someone who preferred machines to people. The only person who ever really talked to him was Dr. Lisa Rodriguez. She studied space signals, looking for signs of life beyond Earth. While other scientists laughed at her theories, David actually listened. He noticed patterns in the radio static that others missed. Lisa was one of the few people who made him feel like his thoughts mattered. That Tuesday night started like any other. David was checking the computer systems when he heard cars pulling up outside. Through the security cameras, he saw men in black clothes getting out of unmarked vehicles. They moved like soldiers, quick and quiet. Something was very wrong. David's heart started beating fast. These weren't regular visitors. The facility was supposed to be empty except for him and Dr. Rodriguez, who was working late in the main lab. He watched the screens as the men split up, surrounding the building. They had weapons and moved with purpose. He grabbed his radio and tried to call Lisa, but got no answer. The men had probably blocked all communications. David had two choices: hide in his office and hope they didn't find him, or try to help the only person who had ever been kind to him. For someone who usually avoided conflict, the choice was surprisingly easy. David knew every inch of the facility. He had installed most of the security systems himself and had memorized every hallway, every door, every hiding spot during his 3 years working there. The attackers might be trained fighters, but this was his territory. He started by cutting the main power, plunging most of the building into darkness. The emergency lights gave just enough glow to see, but created long shadows everywhere. David moved through the building like a ghost, using maintenance tunnels and service corridors that didn't appear on any official blueprints. The first man he encountered was trying to break into the computer server room. David waited until the intruder was focused on the lock, then struck from behind with a heavy wrench. The man dropped without a sound. David felt sick about hurting someone, but pushed the feeling away. Lisa needed him. He took the man's radio and listened to their communications. They were looking for Dr. Rodriguez and her research files. They planned to take everything and leave no witnesses. David's stomach turned cold. These weren't just thieves. They were here to hurt Lisa. Moving faster now, David used his knowledge of the building's layout to stay ahead of the intruders. He triggered fire alarms in empty sections to confuse them, locked doors remotely from his phone, and even activated the sprinkler systems in key hallways. The attackers found themselves separated and frustrated, stumbling around in a building that seemed to fight back. The second man David encountered was climbing through a window near the main laboratory. David had positioned himself on the roof, above, and dropped down behind him. This time he used a fire extinguisher, the heavy metal cylinder connecting with the intruder's head with a dull thud. Another one down. David was amazed at how calm he felt. All his life, people had called him weak, nervous, someone who couldn't handle pressure. But protecting Lisa felt different. Every action came naturally, like he was finally doing what he was meant to do. The remaining attackers were getting desperate. David could hear them shouting to each other over their radios, trying to coordinate their search, but he was always one step ahead, using the building's security system to track their movements while staying invisible himself. He found Lisa in the main laboratory, hiding behind a bank of computers while two men searched for her. She looked terrified but unharmed. David felt a surge of protective anger unlike anything he had ever experienced. The laboratory had large windows overlooking the main telescope dish. David had an idea. He made his way to the telescope control room and began moving the massive dish, its motors creating a loud grinding sound that echoed through the building. The two men in the lab moved toward the windows to investigate the noise. That was when David struck. He had rigged the laboratory's emergency exits to lock automatically, trapping the intruders inside. Then he activated the building's halon fire suppression system in that room only. The colorless gas wouldn't hurt Lisa if she stayed low, but it would knock out anyone standing upright within minutes. The men panicked, trying to break down the doors, but David had reinforced them remotely using the electronic lock systems. Within 5 minutes, both attackers had collapsed from lack of oxygen. David quickly shut off the system and opened the doors, rushing in to help Lisa. She stared at him with wide eyes, unable to believe that quiet, shy David had single-handedly defeated a team of trained attackers. He helped her to her feet, checking, to make sure she wasn't hurt. Outside, they could hear sirens approaching. David had managed to get a message to the local police using an old landline the attackers had missed. As they waited for help to arrive, Lisa looked at David with new respect. The man who had always seemed so ordinary had revealed something extraordinary when it mattered most. He had risked everything to protect her, using intelligence and courage. She never knew he possessed. But neither of them noticed the strange readings on the radio telescope's monitors. The equipment had been recording and transmitting their entire encounter, sending signals deep into space where ancient eyes were watching, waiting, and taking notice of what humans could do when they chose to protect what they loved. David had no idea that his quiet act of heroism had just announced humanity's existence to forces beyond imagination. All he knew was that he had kept Lisa safe. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he had done something that truly mattered. The real adventure was just beginning. 3 months had passed since that terrifying night, but David still woke up sometimes thinking about it. The police had arrested the attackers, though they never revealed who hired them. The facility got new security systems, and David got a promotion. But the biggest change was how Lisa looked at him now. She no longer saw him as just the quiet computer guy who fixed things. They started having lunch together, talking about more than just work. David discovered that Lisa was funny, curious about everything, and surprisingly easy to talk to. She made him feel comfortable in ways he had never experienced before. Their relationship grew naturally as they worked together on something that fascinated them both. Those strange signals David had been tracking for months were getting stronger and more complex. What started as his hobby had become their shared obsession. Lisa brought her scientific training to the puzzle, while David contributed his natural talent for recognizing patterns. They spent hours in the control room, playing back recordings of the mysterious transmissions. The sounds weren't random static like everyone assumed. There were repeating sequences, mathematical relationships, structures that suggested intelligence. David had always been good with numbers and codes, but these signals challenged him in ways nothing ever had. The patterns were unlike anything created by humans. They were too complex, too organized, too purposeful to be natural phenomena from space. Lisa started bringing coffee and sandwiches to their late-night sessions. They would sit side by side, surrounded by computer screens and printouts, trying to make sense of what they were hearing. Sometimes their hands would touch when reaching for the same control, and David would feel his heart skip a beat. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday evening. David was running a new analysis program he had written when suddenly the computer screen filled with symbols. Not human symbols, but geometric shapes that seemed to shift and flow like living things. Lisa gasped beside him. The program had found the key to translating the signals. These weren't just random transmissions from deep space. They were messages, communications between intelligent beings who lived among the stars. David and Lisa stared at the screen, hardly believing what they were seeing. Over the next few weeks, they decoded fragments of what seemed to be an alien language. The beings called themselves something that roughly translated to star children or crystal people. They lived in great cities that traveled between worlds, ruled by someone they referred to as their queen. But as they learned more, David began to worry. The aliens weren't just sending messages to each other. They were also receiving signals from Earth. Their equipment showed that every radio transmission Every satellite communication, every signal humans sent into space was being monitored and recorded. Lisa tried to calm his fears, suggesting that maybe the aliens were just curious about Earth. But David noticed something troubling in the translations. The alien messages showed particular interest in human conflict, in what they called individual combat excellence and protective aggression. Strange things started happening to David around this time. His dreams became incredibly vivid, filled with images of crystal cities floating in space and beings made of light and energy. He would wake up with mathematical formulas in his head that he didn't remember learning. Lisa noticed he was changing too. His reflexes got faster, his thinking sharper, his ability to understand the alien mathematics almost supernatural. David began having moments where he could predict what the next signal would say before they decoded it. Sometimes he would start writing alien symbols without realizing it, his hand moving on its own while his mind was elsewhere. Lisa found these notes and showed them to him, but David had no memory of writing them. The most disturbing discovery came when they realized the aliens had detailed records of that night 3 months ago. The attack on the facility, David's defense of Lisa, every moment had been recorded and transmitted across their empire. The alien messages referred to him, specifically calling him the protective one and the human who fights for others. Lisa felt scared when she learned this, but David felt something different. Despite the strangeness of it all, he felt more alive than ever before. The headaches he used to get were gone. His vision was sharper, his mind clearer. Sometimes he could solve complex problems just by looking at them, as if the answers were obvious. Their relationship deepened as they worked together to understand what was happening. Lisa was the only person David trusted with the truth about his changes, and he was the only one who truly understood her research. They began to depend on each other in ways that went far beyond their work. But their investigation revealed something that terrified them both. The alien empire was vast, spanning hundreds of worlds, but it was in trouble. Their messages spoke of an ancient enemy, something they called the darkness that consumes, or the hungry void. This enemy was destroying entire solar systems, and the Crystal people were losing the war. The final piece of the puzzle came when David decoded a transmission that made his blood run cold. The aliens weren't just watching Earth out of curiosity. They were coming. Their queen had decided that humans, particularly David, might be the key to winning their ancient war. The messages indicated that a scouting fleet was already on its way. Lisa and David calculated the travel time based on the signal delays and realized they had maybe 6 months before first contact. 6 months to prepare for something that would change everything for everyone on Earth. As they sat in the control room that night, surrounded by evidence of an approaching alien encounter, David reached for Lisa's hand. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. He had protected her once from human enemies. Now he might have to protect her and possibly all of humanity from something far more dangerous. The signals from space continued their steady rhythm, counting down to an encounter that would test everything David had learned about himself and everything he was willing to sacrifice for the people he loved. The ships arrived on a Tuesday morning when most people were having their coffee and getting ready for work. David was sleeping after another long night of monitoring alien signals when Lisa called him, her voice shaking with excitement and fear. He rushed to the facility and found chaos everywhere. Military vehicles surrounded the building, soldiers in uniform were setting up equipment, and news helicopters circled overhead like hungry birds. The massive alien ships hung in the sky like dark clouds, visible even in daylight. There were 12 ships total, each one bigger than a football stadium. They didn't look like the spaceships from movies. These vessels seemed alive somehow, with surfaces that shifted and changed like breathing skin. They made no sound but cast huge shadows across the landscape below. Lisa met David at the entrance, her face pale, but determined. She had been up all night as the ships approached, recording everything and trying to communicate with the aliens. The response had been brief and terrifying. They wanted David. General Peterson, the military commander in charge, called David into a meeting room filled with important-looking people in suits. They had maps, computers, and serious expressions. The general was a tall man with gray hair who looked like he had seen many difficult situations. David felt overwhelmed sitting at the table with all these powerful people staring at him. 6 months ago, he was just a computer technician who wanted to be left alone. Now the fate of humanity seemed to rest on his shoulders, and he had no idea why. The general explained that every government on Earth was watching this situation. The alien message had been broadcast globally. "We seek the one called David Chen. We come in peace, but will speak only with him. No threats, no demands, just a simple request that had turned the world upside down." Lisa sat beside David, her hand finding his under the table. She had refused to leave his side despite pressure from the officials. Her research had helped decode the alien messages, making her valuable to the government, but David knew she stayed because she cared about him. The military wanted to use David as their representative while keeping him under their control. The scientists wanted to study him to understand why the aliens were interested in him specifically. The politicians wanted to use the situation to advance their own careers. Everyone had plans for David except David himself. That night, David made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He wasn't going to be anyone's puppet or lab rat. If the aliens wanted to meet him, it would be on his terms, not the government's. Using skills he didn't fully understand, but somehow possessed, David slipped away from the facility. The changes that had been happening to him over the past months now served him well. He moved through the military perimeter like smoke, avoiding guards and cameras with an ease that should have been impossible. Lisa found him preparing to leave and insisted on coming with him. David tried to convince her to stay safe, but she reminded him that they were partners now, in everything. Together, they made their way toward the landing site the aliens had designated in the Nevada desert. The journey took 2 days, traveling at night and hiding during the day. David's enhanced abilities helped them avoid the massive manhunt that developed when the military discovered he was missing. Lisa marveled at how he seemed to know exactly which routes would be clear and when to move or hide. When they finally reached the landing site, David felt a strange sense of coming home. The desert was empty except for a single alien craft that had descended from the main fleet. It was smaller than the ships in orbit, but still enormous up close, its surface rippling with colors that had no names. The first alien beings David and Lisa encountered were unlike anything they had imagined. They were tall and graceful, with bodies that seemed to be made of living crystal and light. They moved without making sounds, communicating in ways that went beyond speech. David felt no fear when he saw them, only curiosity and a strange sense of recognition. These beings had been watching him, studying him, waiting for this moment. When they approached, he could sense their thoughts and emotions as clearly as if they were speaking aloud. The alien scouts, as they called themselves, told David and Lisa about their empire and their queen. They spoke of worlds beyond counting, of civilizations that had risen and fallen while their people traveled among the stars. They had seen countless species, but humans were different in ways they were still trying to understand. David learned that his actions during the attack on the facility had been broadcast across their empire as an example of something their people had never encountered: focused protective violence combined with tactical intelligence and emotional restraint. Other species fought for territory, resources, or dominance, but David had fought purely to protect someone he cared about. But the scouts brought troubling news that made David's stomach turn cold. The Queen's empire was not united. Rival factions were fighting for control, and some of them wanted to claim Earth as a prize in their civil war. David's demonstration of human combat capability had made him valuable to both sides of the alien conflict. The Queen herself was coming to Earth, not just to meet David, but to recruit him for a war that stretched across the galaxy. She believed that human thinking, combined with alien technology, might be the key to victory against enemies that had been consuming worlds for thousands of years. As David and Lisa stood in the alien craft, surrounded by beings of crystal and light, they realized that their quiet life was over forever. The choice David made next would determine not just their future, but the future of every person on Earth. The Queen's ship was already descending from orbit, and with it came decisions that would reshape the destiny of two civilizations. The Queen's ship appeared in Earth's sky like a second moon, but this one was alive. David watched from the desert as the massive vessel settled into the upper atmosphere, its crystal surface pulsing with lights that seemed to breathe. The ship was so huge that it created its own weather, with strange aurora dancing around it even in broad daylight. Standing beside him, Lisa gripped his hand tightly. They both knew their old life was ending forever. The alien scouts had tried to prepare them for this meeting, but nothing could really get you ready to face someone who had lived for thousands of years and ruled an empire spanning the galaxy. The meeting didn't happen on Earth or in space, but somewhere in between. The Queen's technology created a special chamber that floated between the two worlds, where both humans and aliens could exist safely. As they were transported there, David felt like he was floating in a dream made of crystal and starlight. When the Queen first appeared, David's breath caught in his throat. She wasn't solid like humans, but seemed to be made of pure energy that constantly changed shape. Sometimes she looked almost human, other times like a living constellation. Her voice didn't come from one place, but filled the entire chamber, carrying a weight that spoke of ages beyond counting. Lisa's hand trembled in his as the Queen began to speak, her words creating ripples of color in the air around them. She told them she had been watching Earth longer than human civilization had existed, studying how people lived, worked, fought, and loved. But David's actions 3 months ago had shown her something completely new. The Queen explained that in all her travels across the galaxy, she had encountered hundreds of intelligent species. Most of them followed predictable patterns when faced with conflict. They fought for land, resources, or power. They either completely destroyed their enemies or gave up when faced with superior force. But David had done something different that night at the facility. He had used precise, calculated force purely to protect someone he cared about, then stopped the moment Lisa was safe. This kind of focused protective behavior was completely foreign to the Queen's people. In their crystal cities among the stars, they solved problems through group decisions or overwhelming technology. The idea of one person risking everything for another person fascinated them. But the Queen's interest wasn't just curiosity. Her empire faced the worst crisis in its long history. An ancient enemy called the Devourers was winning a war that had lasted thousands of years. These weren't ordinary enemies, but something far worse, beings that consumed entire worlds and left nothing but empty darkness behind. David listened with growing horror as the Queen described the scope of the threat. Whole solar systems had gone, silent, their stars dimmed and planets stripped of all life. The Devourers moved across the galaxy like a plague, and nothing seemed able to stop them. Her military leaders, brilliant as they were, had tried every strategy they knew, but the enemy had learned to counter all their moves. The Queen's offer was bigger than anything David could have imagined. She wanted him to join her empire as a strategic commander, not just a soldier. She would give him access to technologies beyond human understanding, fleets of ships that could cross the galaxy in days, and the power to save countless worlds from destruction. In return, David would lead combined forces against the Devourers, bringing human thinking to a war that had grown predictable with age. The Queen believed that David's unique way of solving problems might be the key to defeating an enemy that seemed impossible to beat. When Lisa asked about Earth's safety, the Queen's answer made David's stomach drop. The Devourers already knew about Earth. The radio signals humans had been sending into space for decades had been detected by their scouts. Earth was already marked for consumption. The Queen offered to protect Earth, but only if David accepted her proposal. She would place her fleets around the solar system and share defensive technology with humanity. Earth would become part of her empire, protected, but also required to serve in the greater war. David felt the weight of 7 billion lives pressing down on him. All those people going about their daily lives, completely unaware that their fate was being decided in a crystal chamber floating in space. The shy computer guy who just wanted to be left alone now held the future of his entire species in his hands. But as David studied the Queen's energy form, he began to notice something she probably didn't want him to see. Despite all her power and ancient wisdom, she was desperate. Her empire was losing this war, and she needed him more than she was willing to admit. This wasn't just an offer of partnership. It was a test to see if humanity was worth saving. Lisa seemed to read his thoughts and gave him a small nod. They had worked together long enough to communicate without words. David understood that this moment would define not just their future, but the future of every person on Earth. Instead of simply accepting or rejecting the Queen's offer, David decided to do something that would surprise everyone in that crystal chamber, including himself. He was going to negotiate with the most powerful being in the galaxy as if they were equals. His response would prove that sometimes the most effective move is the one nobody expects, and that the best solutions come from thinking beyond the choices you're given. David's answer came from somewhere deep inside him, a place he didn't know existed until that moment. Standing in the crystal chamber with the most powerful being in the galaxy waiting for his response, he felt strangely calm. Maybe it was because he finally understood what this was really about. The Queen expected him to either accept her offer and become her weapon, or reject it and watch Earth face the Devourers alone. But David had spent his whole life finding different solutions to problems that seemed impossible. This was just another puzzle, even if the stakes were higher than anything he had ever imagined. He looked at Lisa, saw the trust in her eyes, and knew what he had to do. David took a step forward and spoke words that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. He would help the Queen defeat the Devourers, but not as her champion or her soldier. Instead, he proposed something that had never existed in her ancient empire, a true partnership between equals. Earth wouldn't become another conquered world in her collection. Humans would stand beside her people as allies, sharing knowledge and resources, fighting together against the darkness. The Queen's reaction was immediate and shocking. The crystal chamber filled with light as her energy form shifted through colors that had no names. For several long moments, she said nothing, and David wondered if he had just doomed his entire species with his boldness. Then she laughed. It was a sound like silver bells mixed with distant thunder, beautiful and terrifying at the same time. In all her thousands of years of existence, no being had ever negotiated with her as an equal. Most species either submitted to her power or were destroyed by it. David had done something completely unexpected. The alliance that followed changed both civilizations forever. The Queen kept her word, sharing technologies that transformed human understanding of science and the universe. But more importantly, she listened to human ideas about cooperation, individual initiative, and thinking outside traditional boundaries. David became the first human to serve in the Queen's fleet, but not as a subordinate. He was given the rank of admiral, commanding ships filled with both humans and aliens working together. Lisa joined him as the chief science officer, bridging human intuition with alien mathematics in ways that amazed everyone. Their love story became legend across the galaxy. the quiet man who defended what mattered, and the scientist who helped him save 2 worlds, inspired songs and stories on hundreds of planets. But for David and Lisa, it was still just about protecting the people. They cared about now on a much larger scale. The war against the Devourers tested every skill David had learned. These enemies weren't just destructive, they were ancient and cunning, having fought the Queen's forces for so long that they could predict every traditional strategy. But human thinking brought something new to the conflict. David's tactics confused the Devourers because they were based on concepts they had never encountered. Protection instead of conquest. Cooperation instead of domination. Sacrifice for others instead of pure survival. These ideas were so alien to the Devourers that they couldn't counter them effectively. The final battle took place in the space between galaxies, where the Devourers had been massing for their ultimate assault on the Queen's empire. David led a combined fleet of human and alien ships into the void, knowing that failure would mean the end of countless civilizations. The battle lasted 3 days and changed the course of galactic history. David's strategy wasn't to destroy the Devourers completely, but to cut off their ability to consume life energy from planets. Using a combination of human creativity and alien technology, his forces created a barrier that trapped the ancient enemies in empty space, where they could no longer feed. When victory came, it wasn't through overwhelming force or superior weapons. It was through understanding something the Devourers had never learned, that life is worth protecting not because it serves a purpose, but because it has value in itself. The Queen fulfilled every promise she had made. Earth joined the galactic community as a full partner, not a conquered territory. Humans spread across the stars, bringing their unique perspective to hundreds of worlds. The quiet species from a small blue planet became known throughout the galaxy as the people who chose cooperation over conflict. David and Lisa returned to their observatory in Puerto Rico, but it was no longer the isolated facility it had once been. Now it served as Earth's primary communication center with the Galactic Alliance, monitoring signals from across the universe. Their quiet life had become the foundation for humanity's greatest adventure. Years passed, and cadets from dozens of species came to Earth to study what became known as the human doctrine. It wasn't really a military strategy, but a way of thinking that emphasized protecting others over defeating enemies. David often laughed when he heard himself described as a great military genius. He was still just someone who wanted to keep the people he loved safe. The Queen visited Earth regularly, often sitting with David and Lisa in their old control room, listening to the sounds from space that had started everything. She would say that in all her travels across time and space, she had never met a species quite like humans, beings capable of such focused determination when defending others, yet wise enough to choose peace when possible. And in the observatory, where 2 people had once worked alone, trying to understand mysterious signals from space, the equipment now carried messages of hope, friendship, and the endless possibilities that emerge when different worlds choose to work together instead of fighting each other. David never stopped being amazed that it had all started with him just trying to protect someone he cared about. But Lisa would remind him that the greatest changes in the universe often begin with the simplest acts of love and courage, performed by ordinary people who find themselves in extraordinary situations. The signals from space continued, but now they carried invitations to explore, learn, and grow together among the stars.